Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going on, well, what might just be the ultimate journey. We're doing a global tour, spanning millennia, of humanity's final destination, heaven, the highest place.
It's an idea you find, literally everywhere. It cuts across every border. But what's really striking when you pull all the sources together isn't how similar they are. It's the astonishing variety.
Right.
Every culture has asked the same basic question, what's up there beyond the sky? But they come to these conclusions that are just, well, fundamentally at odds with each other, especially on structure, on who gets in, and I think most importantly on what its purpose even is.
And that's our mission today. We're taking your sources and doing a deep, rigorous global tour. We're going to trace this whole concept from its linguistic roots, where it was basically a big, solid rock in the sky, all the way to modern ideas of it being an abstract state of mind, or maybe even something hardwired into our brains.
We should probably start with a basic foundation, working definition. Across almost every tradition, heaven is, at its core, a location. It might be cosmological, it might be supernatural, but it's a place where gods, angels, spirits, ancestors, where they live.
The highest place.
Always the highest place. A zone of perfection that stands in direct contrast to the underworld or hell.
But the second you move past that, you immediately hit this massive philosophical fork in the road, and it sort of splits the entire world map of belief.
It really does. It's this question of access and permanence. Think about the Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Islam, certain streams of Judaism. The framework is generally linear. You get one life, it's a single journey, and heaven is where good deeds are rewarded for. Well, for eternity. It's the end of the line, the final stop.
But if we shift our gaze east, especially to Indian religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, the whole structure just kind of explodes.
It's not a straight line anymore, it's a circle.
The cycle.
Precisely. In that context, getting into heaven or Svarga or Devaloka is conditional. And this is the crucial part. It's temporary. It's a very nice reward for good karma, sure, but it is not the ultimate goal.
So it's more like a vacation than a final home?
It's a fantastic but temporary rest stop. Because unless you achieve moksha or nirvana, which is liberation from that cycle, you're still on the wheel of samsara, the endless road of rebirth. And that is just like a colossal philosophical difference.
Okay, let's unpack that right away, and let's start with the word itself. Before all the glory and the pearly gates, what did heaven even mean linguistically? Our modern English word heaven comes from the Old English Haphon.
Right, and by about 1000 AD, Hierophon was definitely being used to talk about the Christian place of God, but its original meaning was much more basic, much more physical. It just meant sky or firmament.
And you see that in other related languages, right?
Absolutely. It's clear across the Germanic languages. In German, it's Himmel. In Dutch, it's Himmel. It all starts with the physical thing right above our heads.
Okay, but here's where the linguistic archaeology and the sources gets really wild. If you trace that root back past Proto-Germanic, you get to this even older Proto-Indo-European root, amo, and that means stone.
It's a shocker, isn't it? How does the sky become a stone? But then you look at the related words, the cognates. In Greek, you have akmun, which means anvil or pestle. It can even mean meteorite, something heavy, solid, something that strikes.
And in Sanskrit?
In Sanskrit, there's ashman, which means stone, rock, or even thunderbolt. So what this all suggests is that for our ancient ancestors, the sky wasn't this empty, airy space we imagine today. It was a solid physical vault, a dome of rock.
The sky is a barrier, a hard surface. It's not an open door. And that idea of the sky as a solid, structured dome, well, that leads us straight into the earliest cosmologies we have written down. The ancient Near East, Mesopotamia.
The Mesopotamians absolutely ran with this idea. For them, the sky wasn't just one dome. It was a series of layered domes, usually 3, sometimes 7, that covered a flat Earth. That was their entire universe.
And these domes weren't just metaphorical. They were made of stuff.
Oh, totally. They were, you could say, geological. Built by the gods out of specific precious stones. The sources are so detailed. The lowest dome, where the stars were, was made of jasper. The middle dome was made of something called Sagilmut stone. And that was home to a class of deities called the Igigi.
And the highest one.
The outermost dome was made of Luludanitu stone. And it was actually personified as the god An, the supreme god of the sky. This wasn't some cloudy spiritual realm. It was a structured geological reality built for the gods.
Which brings us to a really crucial point about these ancient cultures, divine exclusivity. Why couldn't a good, upstanding Mesopotamian go to heaven?
Simply because they couldn't. Heaven and earth were fundamentally separate realms by divine law. It was the home of the gods, period. It was never intended as a destination for humans, no matter how virtuous they were.
And the sources are very clear on this.
Crystal clear. You have that incredibly poignant quote from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is talking about his friend Enkidu's death, and he says, "Who can go up to heaven, my friend? Only the gods dwell with Shamash forever."
Such a stark contrast to where we end up. So if heaven is off limits, what happened to mortals after they die?
You went to Kur, or Erkala. It was this dark, shadowy underworld deep beneath the earth. And here's the other huge difference. Everyone went there. It was a neutral destination.
So the idea of your actions in life determining your eternal fate, that just didn't exist for them.
Not in that framework, no. Kur was mandatory for all. It was dark, it was dusty, but it wasn't a place of punishment or reward. The dead just existed there as shadows. It tells you that their moral focus was entirely on this life, on their relationship with the gods here and now, not on some cosmic reward later on.
So the only access was through things like temples, right? The mooring rope between heaven and earth.
Exactly, a communication channel, a cosmic telephone line, but never ever a travel destination for your soul.
So if the ancient world saw heaven as this exclusive, locked-down divine realm, the shift we're about to talk about is maybe one of the biggest revolutions in the history of religion.
It's a seismic shift. The question is, when did heaven stop being the god's private headquarters and start becoming a potential reward for individual humans?
And the sources seem to point to Zoroastrianism as being a key cosmological bridge.
Yes, I think that's right. The prophet Zoroaster introduced a system that really codified the key ingredients for, you could say, a democratization of the afterlife. You get a clear, supreme, good God Ahura Mazda, you get human free will, and you get a dualistic cosmos with a clear heaven the house of song and a clear hell the house of lies.
Which introduces moral accountability into the cosmic equation.
It changes everything. It means your life has a purpose tied to virtue. And when you couple that with a final day of judgment where your soul is weighed, well, you can't have a one-size-fits-all afterlife anymore. Justice has to be served. And this package of ideas, one God, judgment, heaven, and hell, was hugely influential on the Abrahamic traditions that came later.
You can almost see this struggle playing out in real time in the Hebrew Bible. Like its neighbors, it depicts heaven Shamayim, which is always plural, by the way, hinting at those layers.
Good point.
It's shown as generally inaccessible. Prophets like Isaiah might get a vision, a temporary peek behind the curtain, but it's not presented as a destination for the dead.
No, the general expectation was still rooted in that older view. After you die, you rest in Sheol. It's a bit like Kur, a vague, shadowy place under the earth. For centuries, that was the assumed endpoint for human existence.
But there are these little hints of change, these ambiguous ascensions, like Enoch and Elijah.
They're fascinating cases. The text is so cagey about them. Genesis just says Enoch was taken by God. Elijah goes up in a fiery chariot. But the key thing is, the text doesn't say what happened next. Where did they go? What state are they in? They're presented as these monumental exceptions, not as a pathway for everyone else.
So the real tectonic shift for the entire Abrahamic worldview comes during the Second Temple period. We're talking roughly 500 BC to 70 AD. And this context is so important. This is when the Jewish people are living under intense pressure from one empire after another: Persian, Greek, Roman.
And this is when the old cosmology just starts to break down under that pressure. I mean, think about it. If you're being severely oppressed, the idea that a righteous martyr and a corrupt tyrant both end up in the same dusty, neutral place, it becomes morally and politically unbearable.
You need cosmic justice.
You desperately need cosmic justice. And so Jewish thought starts to absorb and adapt these powerful ideas from the cultures around them. The concept of an immortal soul, something that survives the body and wants to return to the divine, that's largely influenced by Greek philosophy.
And at the same time, you get the idea of the resurrection of the dead.
Right, which might have roots in Persian or Zoroastrian cosmology, though the exact timeline is debated by scholars. But what you get is this powerful new synthesis, the idea that the soul seeks to return to God, and that heaven is the eternal home for the righteous dead, just explodes in popularity. Heaven finally transitions from being God's administrative center to being humanity's ultimate reward.
And when we get to Christian conceptions, this evolution is basically complete. In the New Testament, you see talk of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven.
Matthew usually says kingdom of heaven, while Mark and Luke say kingdom of God.
And that's not just a random choice, is it?
No, it's about audience and cultural sensitivity. For a first-century Jewish audience, which was Matthew's primary audience, you'd often avoid saying the name of God directly. So kingdom of heaven was a more respectful, culturally normal way to talk about God's rule. But they both meant the same thing.
And this kingdom was central to Jesus' teaching. But how would people back then have understood that? Were they thinking about floating on clouds after they died?
Not at all. Not at first. To a first-century Jew living under Roman occupation, the kingdom of God meant something very concrete. God's eventual apocalyptic takeover of the world. A direct, perfect rule established on earth.
That puts the Lord's Prayer in a whole new light. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. You're not asking to escape earth.
You're asking for heaven's blueprint to be stamped onto our physical reality. But of course, early Christian thought quickly evolved. Heaven became the immediate destination for the righteous soul upon death, with the resurrection of the body to follow at the end of time in a new heaven and new earth.
And even today, there's this move away from heaven as a physical place. You mentioned Pope John Paul II.
Yes, that's a perfect example of this modern abstraction. He explicitly described heaven not as a physical location in the clouds, but as a living, personal relationship with the Holy Trinity. It's not a place you go to, it's a state of being you enter into.
Which is a million miles away from those solid stone domes we started with.
A completely different universe of thought.
Okay, that abstraction is fascinating. But if you think the Abrahamic views are detailed, wait until we look east. As you said before, in the Indian religions, heaven isn't the finish line. It's more like a very fancy but temporary detour.
Before we jump fully into that, we do have to pause on Islam. It maintains that highly structured, layered architecture we saw in the ancient world, but it's all repurposed for this new reward system.
The seven heavens.
The seven samawat, yes. The Quran and Hadith mention them frequently. This cosmic structure ends at the Sidrat al-Muntaha, this huge, mysterious lote tree that marks the absolute boundary of created knowledge.
So it's the edge of the universe, in a way.
The edge of what can be known. And one interpretation is very cosmological. It suggests that all the stars and galaxies we can see, that's just the first heaven. There are 6 bigger worlds or dimensions beyond our comprehension.
But the actual afterlife destination for a righteous person isn't those spheres themselves, it's jhana.
Correct. Jhana, or the garden, is the paradise reward. And unlike that abstract state we just discussed, jhana is often described in the sources in very rich physical sensory terms. It's a place where your every wish is granted, where you wear silks and jewels, and you enjoy endless banquets. It's designed to be the fulfillment of every positive human desire, but without any of the negative emotions.
So your place in that hierarchy is determined by your deeds on earth.
Precisely. The better your deeds, the higher the level of jhana you attain. But it's also important to note there's diversity here, too. The sources mention the Ahmadiyya view, which is very different.
Oh, so?
They see most of this imagery, for both heaven and hell, as metaphorical. For them, the afterlife is a completely different kind of existence, a rarer entity. It's all about your spiritual transformation in this life. If you cultivate a taste for spiritual pleasures over carnal ones, then the afterlife is the fulfillment of that spiritual state. It shifts heaven from geography to psychology.
Okay, now let's make that full leap. The Indian religions, where the whole framework is cyclical. In Buddhism, you're basically told heaven is not where you want to end up.
That is the great philosophical divide. In Buddhism, you have many heavens called Devaloka, but, and this is the key, they're still part of samsara, still part of the cycle of suffering and rebirth.
So how do you get there?
You get reborn there because of a huge accumulation of good karma. But that karma is like a fuel tank. Your stay is glorious, it's incredibly long, but it is not eternal. Eventually, the good karma runs out, the tank is empty, and you die, only to be reborn somewhere else in the cycle.
So even the best case scenario is still a trap.
It's a golden cage, and that's why the ultimate goal for Buddhists is nirvana, which isn't a heaven, it's a transmundane state. It's blowing out the candle, breaking the cycle of suffering entirely.
The sources give these incredible numbers to emphasize just how temporary these heavens are, even with these mind-boggling lifespans.
It's a way of showing impermanence through sheer scale. You've got heavens where the lifespan is 9 million human years. You go up a level, it's 36 million years. Then you get to the to eat to heaven.
And the lifespan there is just astronomical.
In one tradition, it's 576 million years. Now, to a human, that's basically forever. But the entire philosophical point is that it's not, it's finite. Even these beings are still trapped by impermanence. The only ones who escape are those who have already achieved or are on the verge of nirvana.
And you see this exact same logic in Hinduism with Svargaloka.
Exactly the same principle. Attaining Svarga is a reward for good deeds and rituals, but it's not the final goal. It's a paradise of pleasure, but it's ephemeral. The karmic credit gets spent, and the soul has to return to the cycle.
Compared to the real goal, which is moksha.
Right. Moksha is liberation. It's not about entering a nicer realm. It's about achieving oneness with Brahman, the ultimate reality. It's a transcendent state that is completely distinct from any heavenly abode.
And Jainism uses this layered structure almost as a visual map of merit.
It does. In Jain cosmology, the universe is shaped like a standing human figure. The heavens, the Devaloka, are located at the chest, and they're all layered to provide different levels of reward based on your karmic balance sheet.
But again, just temporary stops on the journey.
Yes. The truly pure souls, the ones who have achieved liberation, the siddhas, they don't stay in the heavens. They ascend to the very, very top of the cosmic figure. The whole structure is a moral map, clearly separating the temporary rewards from the final, permanent state of perfection.
It's just incredible how every culture uses the architecture of its heaven to reflect what it values most. The structure of the sky always seems to validate the rules on the ground.
That's a great way to put it. And you see that beautifully in cosmologies outside of those major Eurasian systems. Take the Nahua people in Mesoamerica, the Aztecs.
Of 13 heavens.
Incredibly rigorous, 13 distinct levels. The highest one was Omeocan, the place of duality. This kind of complex bureaucratic structure speaks to a culture that valued meticulous organization and hierarchy.
And in Polynesian cultures, the heavens are often tied directly to the history of the world itself.
Exactly. In Maori cosmology, you have different traditions with anywhere from 2 to 14 levels. One common version has 10. And these levels have direct jobs related to human life. One is where the gods live, sure, but another, Hawara, is where the spirits of newborn children come from. There's this constant flow between the divine and the human.
We have that amazing source, that drawing by a Tumotuan chief from 1869.
Oh, that's a remarkable document. He drew 9 heavens, but each one was explicitly linked to a stage in the evolution of Earth. The lowest heaven represented the time when the sky was still low. Another represented the first murder. Another, the birth of the first coconut tree. Heaven wasn't just a destination. It was a co-creator and a mirror of their history.
So we've seen heaven as a rock, an eternal reward, a temporary retreat, a historical blueprint. But in more modern and philosophical views, the whole idea of place starts to dissolve.
The geography just vanishes. The Baha'i faith is a perfect example. It completely rejects a physical heaven. Instead, it's a spiritual condition defined by how close your soul is to God.
So your heaven is the state of your relationship with the divine.
That's it. The soul continues to progress and evolve, but its existence is beyond comprehension in the physical plane. It's not a place you go, it's a spiritual trajectory you continue on.
Sikhism takes that even further and basically brings the entire concept back down to earth.
They reject the otherworldly idea entirely. For Sikhs, heaven and hell are both experienced right here, in this world, as you reap the fruits of your karma. The ultimate heaven isn't a place you go to later. It's a state you achieve now. It is the company of the holy. That's it. The physical destination is irrelevant.
And then you get these really interesting systems like theosophy, which almost try to synthesize everything we've talked about.
It's a fascinating attempt. Theosophy suggests that every religion actually gets its own heaven in what they call the upper astral plane, a psychically constructed reality that perfectly matches what you believed in. So if you expected jhana, you get jhana.
But it's still temporary. It combines the Western reward with the Eastern cycle.
Exactly. After about 1,400 years, the soul is recalled by the lords of karma to be reborn. It's this grand unifying theory that tries to honor both traditions.
Which brings us to our final interpretation, the one that bypasses all the theology and goes straight for the wiring in our brains. Neuroscience.
This is a radical turn. Researchers like Lewis Williams and Pierce, they look at the fact that you find these tiered, layered heavens all over the world in cultures that had no contact with each other, from Mesopotamia to the Aztecs.
And they suggest it's not a coincidence.
They hypothesize that this structure isn't just a cultural invention. It might be linked to consistent neural activations, to things our brains consistently produce during altered states of consciousness, like deep trance or meditation. The idea is that the human brain, our basic hardware, is predisposed to generating this kind of tiered vertical map of the cosmos.
So the religious details, the software might be different. One calls it Devaloka, another calls it the 13 heavens. But the underlying structure, this vertical map, is universal because our brains are universal.
It suggests the drive to imagine a layered cosmos might be as fundamental to us as language. It's a structure that emerges from inside us, not just one that's imposed from the outside.
What an incredible tour of the ultimate human idea. We started with the word heaven, literally meaning stone, which gave us the solid, inaccessible domes of Mesopotamia.
Then we tracked that massive shift during the Second Temple period, where the desperate need for cosmic justice transformed heaven from God's private office into humanity's final reward, the democratization of the afterlife.
And then that huge philosophical leap east, contrasting the eternal linear reward of the Abrahamic faiths with the temporary cyclical heavens of Buddhism and Hinduism, where even 576 million years in paradise is still ultimately a trap.
And at the end of the day, the core insight for you, the listener, is that heaven is less about a single place and more about a culture holding up a mirror to its deepest values. Its structure, whether it's bureaucratic, spiritual, or a place of physical pleasure, always reinforces the ethical priorities of the people who imagined it.
The sheer variety shows us these fundamentally different philosophies of justice, of life itself. Are you striving for an eternal reward, or are you striving to be liberated from all states of being, even the most pleasant ones?
Which brings us back to that final provocative thought. Building on that neuroscience perspective, if this universal perception of a tiered, layered heaven is rooted in our shared brain chemistry, does that make the concept of heaven a fundamental, hardwired part of the human operating system, regardless of the theology we lay on top of it? Does the brain itself require a hierarchy for the infinite? Something for you to mull over on your own. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a huge slice of Japanese history, almost 700 years of it, all centered on this one figure, the shogun.
That's right. We're looking at this vast period, roughly 1185 to 1868, where military governments essentially ran Japan. It's a fascinating time.
And our mission, really, is to get under the skin of what the shogun actually was, because that role changed constantly, didn't it? From this all-powerful military leader to sometimes a puppet.
Exactly. A puppet who, on paper at least, was always serving the emperor. That dynamic is key. The supreme commander who technically wasn't the supreme authority.
It's that tension, that power versus legitimacy thing that we really want to unpack for you today.
And maybe the best place to start is the name itself.
Yeah.
Shogun is really just the short version. The full title tells you so much more.
Right. It's Seitaishgun. Let's break that down because, wow, the translation is revealing.
Absolutely is. Seitaishgun translates pretty directly to Commander-in-Chief of the Expeditionary Force against the Barbarians.
Against the barbarians. So, say is conquer, I's barbarian. This wasn't a title about ruling a peaceful nation initially.
Not at all. It was a military field commission, purely functional, given to generals who were literally fighting on the frontiers, pushing back against tribes like the Emishi in the north.
And it's funny, you know, that early Western contact sometimes bypassed this title entirely. They called the shogun the tycoon.
Yeah, sometimes. From the Chinese tycoon. Great lord. It took a while for Seitaishugun to become the standard term used in, like, diplomacy and Western history books. It shows how the perception evolved.
And so let's go back to the beginning, the Hanyin period. That title, Seitaishgun, it was genuinely temporary back then.
Just for specific campaigns, right? Against those Emishi tribes in the north who weren't exactly keen on imperial rule from Kyoto.
Precisely. And that's why figuring out who the very first shogun was is, well, it's a bit murky. The sources don't all agree.
You see names like Tajihin Ogatamori mentioned Shitomono Otomato. Right. But the one usually credited with, let's say, the most significant early success, the one who really subdued those northern tribes around the late 8th, early 9th century, is Sakanue no Tamaramaro.
Okay, so he achieved the mission, but then what happened to the title?
It just lapsed. Yeah. Once the campaign was over, the title was put away. It wasn't a permanent political office. He was a successful general, job done, title gone.
So if the title itself didn't grant lasting political power initially, How did this whole idea of military rule even start? It had to bubble up from the warrior class, the samurai, asserting themselves.
Absolutely. And the first really dramatic attempt, way before the formal shogunate, was Taira no Masakato's rebellion. We're talking early 10th century here.
Masakato wasn't just fighting a local dispute, was he? He went big.
He went huge. He rebelled against the central court, took control of the whole Kanto region, basically the area around modern Tokyo, and declared it independent.
And the really audacious part, he declared himself Shino.
Exactly. A direct challenge to the emperor's sacred authority. I mean, it didn't last. The court crushed him pretty quickly, but the psychological impact was massive. It showed that a powerful warrior could aim for the top spot, or at least try to carve out his own kingdom.
Okay, so that set a precedent, even in failure. Fast forward a couple centuries.
And you get another branch of the Taira clan, led by Taira no Kiyomori. But he played it differently. No open rebellion, he mastered the existing system.
How so?
He rose through the ranks of the court aristocracy, which was unheard of for someone born into the warrior class. He actually reached the very highest position. Daijin, Chancellor of the Realm.
So he got to the top without the shogun title.
Didn't need it. He controlled the court from within. He married his daughter to the emperor, put his own grandson on the throne as Emperor Untoku. He essentially created a samurai-run government inside the old aristocratic framework.
That's clever. He established the principle that the warriors, not the nobles, were now calling the shots politically.
And that set the stage for the formal military government, the shogunate, or bakufu.
Right, the bakufu. The name itself is intriguing. Government from the curtain. It sounds almost temporary, makeshift.
Well, that was the original idea, or at least the symbolism. The maku, the curtain, referred to the field commander's tent on a battlefield. It was meant to signify that this was a military administration subordinate to the emperor, possibly temporary.
But here's a crucial point you find in the sources. They didn't actually call it the bakufu for most of its existence, did they? Especially the Tokugawa shogunate.
No, that's a really important nuance. During the Tokugawa period, they called their government kugi, which means something like public authority or official deliberations.
So when did the term bakufu become common?
Much later, really only in the 1800s, during the Bakumatsu period, the very end of the shogunate. It was actually weaponized by people who wanted to restore the emperor.
So calling it the Pent government was a way of saying it wasn't legitimate, that it was just an appointed military thing and the real power belonged back with the emperor.
Precisely. It became a political term used to undermine the shogun's authority. History being used in real-time politics.
Okay, let's get to the first official shogunate, the one everyone thinks of, Minamoto no Yoritomo.
Right. After defeating the Taira clan in the Genpei War, Yoritomo was the undisputed military power. He established his base in Kamakura, far from the court in Kyoto, and in 1192, he finally got the emperor to grant him the title Sei Taishikun.
And he wasn't just a general anymore, he built a whole new system of government, didn't he? This is the real start of Japanese feudalism as we know it.
He's the architect. Moving to Kamakura was step one, physically separating power from the imperial court. Step two was creating new administrative roles to extend his control across the country.
These are the Shugo and the G2.
Exactly. The Shugo were regional military governors, kind of like provincial police chiefs and military commanders rolled into one.
Okay.
And the G2 were land stewards or administrators, appointed to manage estates, collect taxes, settle disputes at a local level.
So basically, inserting his own loyal warrior officials directly into the provinces, bypassing the old court-appointed governors.
Precisely. It redirected power, loyalty, and crucially, tax revenue away from Kyoto and straight to Kamakura. A fundamental shift.
Brilliant system. But then Yoritomo dies unexpectedly in 1199, and things get messy fast.
Very messy. This is where the idea of the shogun as a puppet really takes hold, almost immediately. Yoritomo's sons were young, inexperienced, or frankly, not up to the job.
Enter the Huji clan.
Yes, the family of Yoritomo's very capable wife, Hojo Masako. Her father, Hojo Tokimasa, saw the power vacuum. He didn't aim for the shogun title himself. Instead, he created a new position, Shikken, regent for the shogun.
So the power behind the throne.
Absolutely. Tokimasa moved quickly. He eliminated rival clans, like the Hiki, who were related to Yoritomo's eldest son. He essentially pushed aside Yoritomo's first successor, Yori, and eventually had him assassinated.
No!
Very. He installed Yoritomo's younger son, Sanetomo, as the third shogun. But Sanetomo was basically controlled by Tokimasa, the Shikken. The principle was set. The Hujuda regent held the real authority, not the Minamoto shogun.
And this internal power dynamic allowed the shogunate to weather a major challenge from the outside, right? The emperor tried to take power back.
Yes, the Juki War in 1221. Former Emperor Go-Toba thought he saw weakness in Kamakura after Sanetoma's assassination. He declared the Huju region, Yoshitoki, Tokimasa's son, an outlaw and tried to rally forces.
How did that go?
It was a disaster for the imperial side. The shogunate forces marched on Kyoto and crushed the emperor's army easily. This was a pivotal moment.
Because it proved the military government was stronger than the imperial court.
Absolutely. It cemented warrior rule. Hujo exiled Go-Toba and 2 other former emperors. And crucially, they established a permanent shogunate office in Kyoto, the Rokuhara Tandai, specifically to watch over the court and prevent any future uprisings. The emperor was now firmly restricted to ceremony.
But the Huchu weren't done refining the puppet system. They took it even further.
Oh, yes. This is puppet mastery level 2.
Yeah.
By the mid-13th century, the Minamoto line of shoguns had died out anyway. So the Huju faced a choice. Who should be shogun now?
And they made a really interesting choice.
A politically brilliant one. In 1252, the 5th Shikken, Hojo Tokiori, arranged for an imperial prince, Prince Munetaka, to become the 6th shogun.
Why bring in royalty? Wouldn't that give the imperial family more leverage?
You'd think so, but it did the opposite. An imperial prince shogun had 0 personal following among the samurai vassals. He was an outsider, a figurehead brought in from Kyoto. Unlike a potential samurai shogun, he couldn't rally independent support or challenge the Huju. It made the shogun's position purely ceremonial, completely dependent on the region.
So it further neutralized the office of shogun itself.
Precisely. And then Tokiori added another layer of insulation for the real power. He retired as Shikken, but he didn't give up power. He continued to rule privately, using the title Tokusu.
Tokusu, what does that mean?
It just meant head of the main line of the Huchi clan. It wasn't even an official government position.
So if there was trouble, a rebellion, or assassination attempt, the target would be the figurehead shogun, or maybe the official shikken.
While the Tokushu, the real decision-maker, was operating behind the scenes, without an official title that could be easily attacked or transferred.
That's incredible. Look at the layers. You've got the emperor at the top, theoretically, then the shogun, who's now an imperial prince puppet, then the shikken, the regent, who's also becoming a figurehead for the real power.
Which is the Tokusu, the Huji clan head. And sometimes if the Tokushu was too young or incapacitated, the power actually rested with his chief retainer, the Naikanrei. It's like Russian dolls of political power.
Amazing complexity. That must have made it incredibly stable for a while.
It did, for over a century.
Yep.
But even the most intricate system can break. And the breaking point for Kamakura came from an unexpected direction: the Mongols.
The invasions of 1274 and 1281, Japan fought them off, famously with the help of typhoons, the kamikaze, but victory came at a cost.
A huge cost, specifically for the shogunate's relationship with its own warriors, the Gokunin. These samurai fought bravely, incurred debts equipping themselves, expected rewards.
But there were no rewards.
Exactly. Unlike a normal war where you conquer new territory and distribute it, they just defended Japan. There was no new land to give out. The shogunate was financially broke from the defense effort anyway, so the loyal samurai got nothing but debt and resentment.
And that created an opening
For Emperor Go-Daigo. He saw the widespread dissatisfaction among the warrior class and decided it was time for another imperial restoration attempt. This time, fueled by samurai anger, it worked. The Huju were overthrown, Kamakura was sacked and burned in 1333. End of an era.
So the Fuji are gone. Emperor Go-Daigo is back in charge. But his restoration, the Kenmu restoration, it didn't last long, did it?
Barely 3 years, 1333 to 1336. And it failed spectacularly.
Why? He got what he wanted, direct imperial rule.
Yeah, but he completely misread the situation. He tried to run a feudal, warrior-dominated country using the old, outdated aristocratic systems from centuries before. Plus, he made the crucial mistake of rewarding the court nobles who'd done nothing instead of the samurai warriors who'd actually overthrown the Huge for him.
So the warriors felt betrayed. Again.
Big time.
Again.
And the whole administration just ground to a halt. It was chaotic. And the key samurai leader who felt most slighted was Ashikaga Takauji.
The guy who had initially helped Go-Daigo defeat the Huji.
The very same. Takauji, who was actually a descendant of the Minamoto clan, saw his chance. He turned on Go-Daigo, drove him out of Kyoto, installed a different member of the imperial family as a rival emperor, and in 1338 had himself appointed Sei Taishikan.
And that's the start of the Ashikaga shogunate, based back in Kyoto this time, right? In the Muramachi district.
Yes, which was a significant difference from Kamakura. Being right next to the imperial court in Kyoto ultimately proved to be a source of weakness, not strength, for the Ashikaga.
Yeah.
Well, for starters, the era began with immediate division. Go-Daigo didn't just disappear. He fled south to Yoshino and set up a rival imperial court.
Ah, so you had two emperors.
For almost 60 years.
Yeah.
This was the Nanboku-Chu period, the period of the southern and northern courts. One emperor in Kyoto, back to the Ashikaga, and Go-Daigo's line claiming legitimacy from the south. It tore the country apart with constant fighting.
60 years? That's a long time. Who eventually resolved it?
The third Ashikaga shogun, Yoshimitsu, finally managed to reunify the courts in 1392. He was probably the most powerful of the Ashikaga shoguns. But even under him, the fundamental problem of the Ashikaga era was already apparent. Decentralization.
They didn't control the country as tightly as the Huja had.
Not even close. Instead of keeping power centralized, the Ashikaga shoguns tended to empower their regional governors, the Chugo. They gave them more and more authority, military power, judicial power, even the power to levy their own taxes within their provinces.
That sounds like a mistake. You're basically letting your regional deputies become independent rulers.
That's exactly what happened. These empowered Shugo evolved into Shugo daimyo regional feudal lords who commanded their own armies, funded by their own tax revenues. The shogun in Kyoto became increasingly reliant on their goodwill.
So, while the Ashikaga shoguns in Kyoto were becoming famous patrons of the arts, Zen Buddhism, no theater, the Golden Pavilion built by Yoshimitsu, their actual political and military grip was weakening.
Precisely. Culturally brilliant, politically fragile, and this slow diffusion of power eventually exploded into outright civil war.
The Sun War.
The Sino War, starting in 1467. It began as a succession dispute within the Ashikaga family itself, but it quickly spiraled into a massive nationwide conflict between the great Shugo daimyo clans fighting for dominance.
And it was fought right in the capital, wasn't it?
Right in Kyoto. For over a decade, the city was systematically destroyed, burned to the ground multiple times. It was devastating.
And the result for the shogunate?
Total collapse of authority. The Shogun War shattered any remaining power the Ashikaga shogun held. It marked the definitive start of the Sengoku Jidai, the Age of Warring States.
Where the daimyo basically became independent kings in their own territories.
Exactly. The Shugo daimyo gave way to the Sengoku daimyo, who ruled, fought, made alliances, and ignored the shogun entirely. The shogun became irrelevant, a figurehead clinging to a title in the ruins of Kyoto.
Which makes the story of the 13th shogun, Ashikaga Yoshiteru, so poignant.
It really is. Yoshiteru became shogun in a time when the office had no real power, no money, no army to speak of. But he himself was apparently a skilled warrior, a renowned swordsman trained by the famous Sukahara Bokuden.
A warrior trapped in a powerless position.
Completely. And his end was tragic, but somehow fitting for the era. In 1565, forces loyal to the Miyoshi clan, who were maneuvering for power, attacked his residence.
Did he try to escape?
No. The accounts say he prepared for battle. He reportedly laid out his collection of famous swords on the floor around him. He fought personally, bravely, apparently cutting down several attackers before being overwhelmed and killed. The sword shogun dying in a hopeless last stand.
A symbol of the end, really.
Absolutely. The Ashikaga shogunate limped on for a few more years on paper, but it was effectively over. It officially ended in 1573 when Oda Nobunaga, one of the rising Sengoku daimyo, simply kicked the last Ashikaga shogun Yoshiaki out of Kyoto. No battle needed, just dismissed. #Takeoff. Unification and the apex of military rule. Tokugawa.
So the Ashikaga are out. The country is in chaos, the Sengoku period. And then come the three figures who put Japan back together: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu.
The great unifiers. And their careers show how the nature of power had shifted again. The shogun title itself wasn't the ultimate prize anymore. Controlling the military and the land was.
Well, look at Nobunaga. He effectively ended the Ashikaga shogunate, conquered most of central Japan using innovative tactics, especially firearms. But he never took the title Seihai Taishikun, did he?
No. Sources suggest he was offered it, or could have easily taken it, but he seemed uninterested. He preferred high-ranking titles from the old imperial court aristocracy instead.
Like Udejin, the minister of the right, or that military-sounding one, Yukane no Taishu.
Exactly. Major Captain of the Right Division of Inner Palace Guards. These titles gave him immense prestige and legitimacy, connecting him to the emperor, but without the baggage and the perceived weakness of the recent Ashikaga shoguns. He was forging his own path to power.
And then his successor, Hideyoshi, completed the unification, rose from literally peasant origins to become the most powerful man in Japan. He took the highest court titles, Kampaku, imperial regent, even Daiji Daijin, chancellor. But still, no shogun title. Why not?
This is a key point. Despite having absolute power, the consensus among historians is that his humble birth was the sticking point. The shogun title, by tradition, was supposed to go to someone descended from the Minamoto clan, or at least somewhat of high samurai or noble birth.
Even though the Shijo had put imperial princes in the role?
Right, the rule wasn't totally rigid, but apparently installing a former peasant, however powerful, was a step too far for tradition. It shows that even at the height of military power, these old legitimacies still mattered, at least symbolically.
Fascinating. So that leaves Tokugawa Ieyasu. He wins the decisive battle of Sekigahara in 1600, consolidates power.
And he takes the title. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu becomes shogun, establishing the third and final shogunate, the Tokugawa or Edo shogunate, and he learned from all the mistakes of the past.
First big move, setting up his capital in Edo, modern Tokyo, far from Kyoto and the imperial court's influence like Yoritomo did with Kamakura.
Crucial move. Then he systematically dealt with potential rivals. The biggest threat was Hideyoshi's young son, Hideyori, and his supporters based in Osaka Castle. Ieyasu eliminated them decisively in the Siege of Osaka campaigns in 1614-1615.
Okay, rivals removed. But how did he ensure long-term stability and control over all those powerful daimyo across the country? That's what tripped up the Ashikaga.
Ieyasu's system for controlling the daimyo was genius, really. It revolved around classifying them.
This is the Fudai and Tazama distinction.
Exactly. Fudai daimyo were the inner lords, those families who'd been loyal to Ieyasu before the Battle of Sekigahara. They were rewarded with lands close to Edo, strategically important locations, and positions within the shogunate bureaucracy. They were the trusted core.
And the Dozama.
The outer lords. These were the powerful clans who had submitted to Ieyasu only after Sekigahara or had even fought against him. They were generally given large domains, but crucially, these domains were far away from Edo, often on the periphery of Japan. Think Satsuma and Chushu in the southwest.
So keep your potential enemies far away, isolated from the center of power and excluded from the government.
Precisely. They were also watched closely, subject to rules requiring them to spend alternate years in Edo, the Sankenkutai system, which drained their finances, and leave their families as hostages. It was a system designed to prevent any regional power base from becoming strong enough to challenge the Tokugawa.
Very thorough. And Ieyasu also followed that Hujo playbook of ruling from behind the scenes, didn't he?
He did. He pulled a Nogosho. He retired as shogun in favor of his son, Hidetada, after only 2 years, in 1605. But he continued to wield the real power as the retired or cloistered shogun, the Shosho, until his death over a decade later.
Why do that? Why not just stay shogun?
It ensured a smooth succession, trained his heir under his supervision, and protected the core power. If something went wrong, the official shogun took the heat, while the experienced Shosho remained secure. It became a standard Tokugawa practice.
Okay, so the daimyo are controlled, succession is managed. What about the emperor? How did they neutralize that potential source of legitimacy?
With legislation. In 1615, the shogunate issued the Kinshu Narabiniku Shohado laws for the imperial court and nobility.
And what did these laws say?
In essence, they confined the emperor and the court aristocracy strictly to scholarly pursuits, poetry, and performing ancient ceremonial rituals. All political power, military authority, foreign relations, appointments, everything that mattered for ruling the country was explicitly the domain of the shogun. The emperor remained the divine figurehead, the ultimate source of legitimacy, but completely stripped of political function.
Locked in a gilded cage.
Pretty much. The Tokugawa were also obsessed with ensuring their own bloodline continued.
This is where the collateral houses come in, the Gasanke and Gasankyo.
Exactly. The Gasaki were 3 main branch families, Owari, Kishu, Mido, established by Ieyasu's younger sons. Later, the Gasanki, Tayasu, Hitotsubashi, Shimizu were added. If the main shogunal line failed to produce an heir, a successor would be chosen from one of these collateral branches. It guaranteed the shogunate stayed within the Tokugawa clan.
Very systematic. And speaking of heirs, we have to mention the shoku. The shogun's great interior, or harem, often portrayed very dramatically.
And it was dramatic, sometimes housing hundreds, even close to 1,000 women wives, concubines, attendants, officials. But the sources emphasize it wasn't just about pleasure or producing heirs. It was a major political center in its own right.
Political how?
It was run with strict hierarchies and complex rules. Marriages between the shogun and daughters of powerful daimyo were arranged here, sealing alliances. But it also acted as an information hub and a control mechanism. Wives and ladies-in-waiting from daimyo families were essentially hostages, and their activities and the information they received could be monitored. It influenced succession politics within the castle and helped manage relationships with the feudal lords.
Fascinating, a hidden political world. Now, within this long Tokugawa piece, you get some very different kinds of shoguns, like Tokugawa Tsunayoshi, the fifth shogun, famous for his animal protection laws.
Infamous, some might say. His Shuriya Waremi no Rei edicts on compassion for living things placed extreme restrictions on harming animals, especially dogs. People were punished severely, even executed for cruelty to animals. Historically, it was often seen as bizarre tyranny.
But there's a more recent interpretation.
Yeah, modern historians often see it as something more complex. Perhaps a deeply Buddhist-influenced attempt to fundamentally change the ethics of society, to move away from the brutality of the recent Civil War era and instill compassion, order, and civic virtue, albeit through very harsh enforcement. Social engineering on a grand scale.
And then you have someone like the eighth shogun, Yoshimune, who focused on practical reforms.
Right, Yoshimune faced financial difficulties and implemented the Kishu reforms. These were much more pragmatic, trying to stabilize rice prices, encouraging new cash crops, cutting shogunate expenses.
And didn't he introduce something for public feedback?
He did, the Maya Subako, a suggestion box placed outside Edo Castle where anyone, commoner or samurai, could submit petitions or ideas directly to the shogun. Apparently some useful civic improvements like better firefighting systems came out of it. It showed the shogunate could still adapt and respond, at least sometimes. #V.
But even this incredibly stable Tokugawa system eventually started to crack. The final decades, the Bakumatsu era from the 1850s onwards, were full of turmoil. What went wrong?
It was a combination of internal rot and external shock. Internally, you had renewed factionalism, particularly fierce disputes over who should succeed childless shoguns. The Naki faction versus the Hitotsubashi faction, drawing in powerful daimyo. The finances were strained again, too.
So the system was weakening from within, and then came the shock from the outside.
Commodore Matthew Perry and the American black ships arriving in Edo Bay in 1853, demanding Japan open up to trade. This was the catalyst.
Why was it so destabilizing?
Because the shogunate, weakened by internal division, felt it had no choice but to agree. Signing the treaties with the U.S. and then other Western powers, in 1854 and 1858 treaties that were clearly unequal and unfavorable to Japan, shattered the shogun's prestige.
How so?
For 250 years, the Tokugawa had justified their rule, partly on their ability to keep foreigners out and maintain peace. Now they looked weak, unable to defend the nation. This gave ammunition to anti-shogunate forces.
And those forces rallied around a powerful slogan, Suno-jure.
Revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. It was brilliant political messaging. It took the emperor, who'd have been powerless for centuries, and made him the symbol of national unity and resistance. And it painted the shogun as a failure, someone who had betrayed Japan by yielding to foreigners.
So the emperor becomes a political weapon against the shogun.
Exactly. And the movement gained momentum, particularly in those powerful Tozama domains that Ieyasu had exiled to the periphery centuries earlier, especially Choshu and Satsuma.
The outer lords, they were so resentful.
They had long memories and ambitions. And crucially, these two domains, historically rivals, managed to form an alliance, the Setchushi Alliance.
That was a big deal, wasn't it? Brokered by figures like Sakamoto Arima.
A huge deal. United, their military forces were formidable. They proved it by defeating the shogunate's forces in the Second Choshu expedition in 1866. It showed the shogun could no longer enforce his will, even within Japan. The game was up.
And the last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, he saw the writing on the wall.
He did. In 1867, facing overwhelming pressure from the Such alliance and other domains, Yoshinobu made a calculated move. He formally returned governing authority, Taisei Hukan, to the young Emperor Meiji. He hoped this would preserve a role for the Tokugawa clan in a new government structure.
But it didn't quite work out that way.
No. The radical elements in the Sacha alliance wanted the Tokugawa gone completely. This led to the Boshin War in 1868-69, where imperial forces defeated the remaining shogunate loyalists. The Meiji Restoration was complete. 700 years of shogunate rule was over.
And the samurai class itself soon followed. The Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, was the last gasp of the traditional warrior way against the new conscript army of the modernizing state.
A truly definitive end to that era.
There's also that fascinating little story about the lost sword, the Hanju Masamune.
Ah, yes. A legendary sword, considered perhaps the finest ever made, passed down through the Tokugawa shoguns, a symbol of their legitimacy and power.
And what happened to it?
After World War II, during the American occupation, all swords were ordered to be surrendered. The Tokugawa family handed the Hanja Masamune over to a local police station in late 1945, as required, and it just disappeared, vanished without a trace.
Wow, the ultimate symbol of shogunal power, just
Wow,
gone. A perfect metaphor, really.
it really is.
So the shogunate is gone, the samurai are gone, but does any legacy remain? You mentioned the idea of ruling from behind the curtain.
It's incredibly persistent, that idea. In modern Japanese politics, you still hear the term Yami Shogun, shadow shogun.
What does that refer to?
It's used, often critically, to describe a powerful retired politician, maybe a former prime minister or faction leader, who no longer holds official office but is still seen as pulling the strings behind the scenes, influencing policy, choosing successors.
Just like the Hushotokusu or the Tokugawa Gosho.
Exactly. Figures like Kakugi Tanaka in the 70s and 80s, or more recently Ichiro Ozawa, have been labeled Yami Shogun. It suggests this ancient pattern of indirect rule of hidden power centers hasn't entirely disappeared from the political culture. It's perhaps the shogun's most subtle yet enduring legacy. Hashtag outro.
So looking back over this incredible 700-year span, the shogun was this constant paradox, wasn't he? The de facto ruler, holding all the real military and administrative power.
But always technically subordinate to the emperor, maintaining that fiction of legitimacy derived from the imperial throne, even when the emperor himself was completely powerless.
And the real genius, or maybe the complexity, often lay in those layers beneath the shogun, the regents, the clan heads, the retired shoguns, the puppet masters, pulling the strings of the supposed supreme commander.
It's a story of constantly shifting power, hidden behind layers of titles and ceremony. Yet, through all of it, through 3 major shogunal dynasties, something remarkable didn't happen. No shogun ever successfully tried to eliminate the imperial family and take the throne himself. They could sideline the emperor, control him, legislate around him, but they never replaced him.
Which leaves us with a really profound final thought for you, the listener. Why? Why, when these military rulers held absolute physical control over Japan for centuries, did they never take that final step? What stopped Yoritomo or the Huge or Ieyasu from simply declaring themselves emperor?
It seems the answer wasn't about swords or soldiers or castles. It was about something intangible, the sacred mythological authority of the emperor. The belief, deeply embedded, that the emperor was the Tenno, the heavenly sovereign, descended directly from the sun goddess Amaterasu.
That religious legitimacy proved to be the one power the shoguns couldn't conquer.
Apparently so. It was the ultimate backstop, the reason the imperial line, despite centuries of political irrelevance, remains unbroken to this day. A fascinating testament to the enduring power of belief over brute force.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place where we take these giant stacks of research and, well, turn them into something useful, something fascinating, especially for you, the ever-curious learner.
Today, we are going deep, really deep, into the most complex machine we know of, your own mind. We're doing a deep dive on a concept that just completely changed how we see everything from learning to recovery. We're talking about neuroplasticity.
Okay, so let's break this down. If you were listening to a neuroscientist, say, 50 years ago, they would have told you that your brain, once you were past childhood, was pretty much set.
Like biological cement.
Exactly. But the sources we have here today tell a completely different story, an astonishing one, really. Neuroplasticity, or just plasticity, is the brain's ability to constantly change, to remodel itself.
And that's the key word, constantly. This isn't a small tweak here or there.
Yeah.
We're talking about growth, reorganization, new connections happening throughout your entire life.
And it's happening in response to, well, everything. Obvious things like learning a new skill, but also much more subtle things.
Right. It could be a major environmental change, recovering from an injury.
Yeah.
But also things you might not even think about.
Such as?
We're talking about huge physiological shifts, like pregnancy, which we now know changes brain structure, or even things like psychological stress, which can actually shrink parts of the brain.
And on the other side, things like diet, caloric intake, and of course, just deliberate, focused practice.
All of these things are signals. They're demands telling your brain to optimize, to change its own structure and function.
And here's the really interesting part historically. For decades, the mainstream scientific community just assumed this kind of rewiring only happened in a specific window.
The critical period.
Right, in childhood. After that, they thought the brain was basically locked in.
And that idea was a huge bottleneck. I mean, it really held back progress. The brain was seen as this precious, non-renewable organ. But the research from the later 20th century it blew that idea apart.
It proved that the brain stays incredibly plastic well into old age. It's this dynamic, evolving landscape.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to trace the unexpected history of this discovery, unpack how this rewiring actually works, and then get into the real-world applications.
From stroke recovery to learning a new language, this is the ultimate deep dive into the changing self.
To really get why this was such a breakthrough, you have to understand just how powerful that fixed brain idea was. So we really need to start not with biology, but with a concept.
Which takes us all the way back to 1890, to William James.
Exactly. In the Principles of Psychology. And he wasn't talking about neurons. He was applying the term plasticity to behavior, to habit. He had this brilliant definition.
It was something like weak enough to yield to an influence, but strong enough not to yield all at once.
Yes. And that's the perfect balance, right?
Yeah.
You have to be open to change. But if you changed with every single input, you'd have no identity. He was describing how we form habits, how ideas stick.
What's wild, though, is that even before James, there was actual experimental evidence, a forgotten start, back in 1793.
An Italian anatomist, Michele Vincenzo Malacarne, he did this incredibly long-term experiment. He'd take a pair of animals, usually birds, and drain one of them for years on complex tasks.
And the other one was the control.
Right. And when he dissected their brains, he found the cerebellums of the trained animals were, and this is a quote, substantially larger.
The cerebellum, which we know is crucial for motor learning.
It was a massive anatomical finding.
Okay.
But it was just too early. The scientific community had no way to process it, no framework for the idea that training could physically change the brain. So it was forgotten.
So the idea is floating out there, but no one's catching it. Then we jump to the early 1900s, and we get this big conflict between the new neuron doctrine and this weird idea of plasticity.
Precisely. And the person right in the middle of it is Santiago Ramón y Cajal, the father of modern neuroscience. He was one of the few who dared to use the term neuronal plasticity to describe changes in adult brains.
That must have been incredibly controversial.
Oh, hugely. It flew right in the face of this idea that the central nervous system, the CNS, was fixed, that you couldn't make new cells. The establishment view was that the blueprint was set in childhood, and that was it.
So we have the idea, we have this forgotten evidence, and we have Cajal's lone voice. But the real solid proof, that doesn't come for decades.
Right. The scientific hammer doesn't really drop until 1964 with Marion Diamond.
My work with rats is foundational. This was the first, unambiguous evidence that you just couldn't ignore.
She set up these enriched environments, cages full of toys, ladders, other rats, basically high stimulation. And she compared the brains of those rats to rats in standard boring cages.
And she found a physical difference.
A measurable anatomical difference in the cerebral cortex. The neurons had more complex branching, the cortex was thicker. It was proof that the environment literally changes brain structure.
But even with Diamond's work, the field was still hung up on this idea of the critical period, that sure, the brain is plastic, but only when you're young.
And that idea got a huge boost from David Hubel and Torsten Weisel's famous kitten experiment.
Can you walk us through that one?
Absolutely. They would temporarily shut one eye of a kitten during a key developmental window, and what they saw was that the part of the visual cortex that was supposed to get signals from the shut eye, it didn't just go quiet.
It got repurposed.
Exactly. It started processing information from the open eye. The brain was being ruthlessly efficient, reassigning its own cortical real estate.
So it proved plasticity, but it also seemed to confirm that this kind of major rewiring was a childhood thing?
It did. The implication was that once that developmental window closed, the system was locked. And that's where Michael Mercenary comes in. He spent his career challenging that idea.
He argued that plasticity happens throughout life, and he had the proof.
His work with animal monkeys in the 80s was the real breakthrough. He and his team would create these incredibly detailed maps of the sensory cortex in the monkey's brain, specifically for the hand.
So they knew which part of the brain corresponded to which finger.
Perfectly. Then they did something drastic. They cut a peripheral nerve in the hand and then sewed it back together.
Which should have created a jumbled, disorganized mess in the brain's map.
That was the expectation. But when they remapped the brain later, the map was nearly normal. It had reorganized itself. For the brain to take that jumbled, messy input from the healing nerve and create a coherent map, it meant the brain could not be hardwired.
That's the moment the old idea dies.
It had to. It confirmed the brain is plastic from cradle to grave, constantly remodeling itself based on experience. That work really changed everything.
Okay, so if the brain is constantly changing, how does that actually happen? I mean, what's the biological engine driving all of this?
At its core, it's all about the synapses, those tiny gaps where neurons communicate. The strength of those connections changes based on activity.
And it's not just a simple on-off switch. The source material talks about a whole cascade of signals.
It's incredibly complex. You have these molecular signals that go all the way down to altered gene expression. So it's changing the DNA instructions for how that neuron behaves.
We see terms like phosphorylation, cytokines.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Think of phosphorylation as a quick flip switch. It lets the brain immediately tune the strength of the synapse. Then you have things like inflammatory cytokines. We think of inflammation as bad, but here it's a signal that helps mediate repair and plasticity after an injury.
So there's a whole system working together.
A whole system. You have protective proteins, energy from the mitochondria, even neurotransmitters like acetylcholine, which helps prime the cortex to be more receptive to change. It's a huge coordinated effort.
Given that complexity, researchers have had to create a framework. This brings us to the two main types of plasticity: structural and functional. Let's start with structural.
Structural neuroplasticity is the one you can see. It's the brain's ability to physically change its connections. We're talking about measurable changes in gray matter, or the creation and retraction of synapses. It's changing the physical infrastructure.
And we can see this now with modern imaging, like MRIs.
Yes, which is why it's so heavily studied. We can literally see the cortex thicken when someone learns a new skill. But there's a really important distinction to make for humans.
Which is?
While some animals are constantly making new neurons, adult neurogenesis, well, it has not been convincingly demonstrated in humans.
Wait, that's a huge deal. So for us, it's not about growing new brain cells from scratch.
Not primarily. It's about remodeling and repurposing the ones we already have, which makes the reorganization of our existing circuits even more important. And that brings us to functional neuroplasticity.
So this is less about the physical structure and more about how the existing networks operate.
Exactly. It's the ability to alter the functional properties of those networks. And this happens in two main ways. The first is what we usually think of with learning.
Activity-dependent plasticity. The old saying, neurons that fire together wire together.
That's the heart of it. This is where you get long-term potentiation, or LTP. If two neurons talk to each other a lot, that connection gets stronger, faster, more reliable. It's like building a highway.
And if you don't use a connection?
It gets weaker. That's long-term depression, or LTD. The footpath gets overgrown. This LTP-LTD system is essential for memory, for learning, and for forgetting what's not important.
And the second type of functional plasticity is when the brain is forced to compensate for damage.
Right. That's what's sometimes called maladaptive plasticity, is the brain trying to transfer functions to work around a problem. Sometimes it works, but sometimes that reorganization creates new problems, like chronic pain.
The sources break this down even further into 4 specific mechanisms the brain uses to adapt. The first is homologous area adaptation.
This is something you see mostly in children. If a task is usually handled by one area in the brain, and that area gets damaged, the brain can shift the entire operation to the same area in the opposite hemisphere.
A complete functional takeover.
It's remarkable. The younger brain is just less specialized, so it's easier to reassign resources like that.
Next is map expansion. We saw that with the Mersenic monkeys.
And we see it in humans all the time. If you're a professional violinist, the part of your motor cortex that controls your left hand's fingers will literally get bigger. The brain dedicates more hardware to the software you use most.
The third one, cross-modal reassignment, seems like something out of science fiction.
It's truly stunning. This is when a brain region that's designed for one sense, say vision, starts processing input from another sense, like touch or sound.
Because its original input is gone.
Exactly. The brain says, I have all this processing power and I'm not getting any data, so I'll process whatever data you give me. We'll see some wild examples of this later.
And finally, there's compensatory masquerade.
This is the brain being clever. If your normal way of doing a task is broken, the brain finds a completely different cognitive strategy to get the same result. It's like finding a detour when the main road is closed.
It's incredible. So this flexibility opens up a huge world of applications, from training to therapy.
Absolutely. Let's start with what happens when we intentionally train our brains. And there's no better example than the London taxi driver study,
Right, Eleanor Maguire's work. She studied the drivers who had to learn the knowledge.
which is just an insane cognitive task. Memorizing 25,000 streets, thousands of landmarks. It's a massive feat of spatial memory.
And what did the MRIs show?
A significant redistribution of gray matter in the hippocampus. The posterior part, which is heavily involved in spatial navigation, was significantly larger in the taxi drivers.
So the brain didn't just get bigger, it reallocated its resources to meet this specific, intense demand.
It's undeniable proof of structural plasticity in healthy adults,
Right.
driven by training. The sheer effort of learning London physically reshaped their brains.
Another area where we see this is multilingualism. Learning more than one language seems to be a profound workout for the brain.
It is. We see both structural and white matter changes. Using a technique called VBM, which measures gray matter density, researchers found that multilinguals have more gray matter in the inferior parietal cortex.
A region tied to language and attention.
Exactly. The brain is reinforcing the hardware needed for that demanding task. And the timing matters. People who learn a second language earlier show an even greater density.
It's not just the processors, right? It's the wiring between them.
That's the other part. Using another technique, DTI, they found increased white matter density in bilinguals. If gray matter is the computer, white matter is the high-speed cable connecting everything. Their brains build better, faster connections to handle switching between languages.
This power of focused attention also shows up in practices like art and meditation.
Definitely. Research has linked long-term meditation practice to measurable changes. Increased cortical thickness, more gray matter in the hippocampus and frontal regions.
Areas for memory, attention, emotional regulation.
Right. It suggests that sustained, intentional focus is a form of training that strengthens the brain's executive functions. The same goes for art. Consistent, purposeful painting or music practice functionally modularizes those skills in the brain. They become easier, more efficient to execute.
Let's talk about the body. We always hear that physical health is brain health, and exercise seems to be a powerful trigger for plasticity.
A massive one. Aerobic exercise especially floods the brain with neurotrophic factors. Think of them as fertilizer for your brain cells.
Like BDNF, which people call miracle grow for the brain.
Exactly. These chemicals stimulate synaptic growth, and that leads to measurable improvements in things like spatial memory, and you can see increased gray matter volume, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus.
So running is literally building your thinking brain.
It's direct proof. Improving your cardiovascular health is directly remodeling the parts of your brain responsible for higher-level thought.
Music is another powerful tool, especially in therapy.
Yes, music-supported therapy has shown really significant results for stroke patients in recovering motor control. The rhythm, the auditory feedback, it seems to help guide the necessary cortical reorganization to get a limb working again.
It helps the brain find a new pathway around the damage.
Precisely. And it's not just for recovery. For older adults, playing an instrument has been shown to increase gray matter volume and fight back against age-related cognitive decline.
Okay, let's get into the most extreme examples of this. Sensory substitution. This is where the brain's flexibility really becomes clear.
This goes back to Paul Bacchiarita's work in the 1960s. He built these devices. The most famous one was a chair with a grid of vibrating nubs in the back.
And a camera.
A camera. It would translate the visual image from the camera into a pattern of vibrations on the person's back. So visual information was coming in through the sense of touch.
And the brain. It learned to see with the back.
In a sense, yes. After training, subjects could perceive depth, movement, texture. Their brains learned to interpret these tactile patterns as spatial information. It proved that vision is a cognitive experience, not just an optical one. The brain doesn't care where the signal comes from.
A more modern example of this is echolocation in the blind.
Yes. When blind individuals use clicks to navigate, listening to the echoes, fMRI scans show something incredible. Those sound signals are being processed in the visual cortex.
The part of the brain that should be dark.
Right. It's been stripped of its normal input, so it repurposes itself to analyze the spatial geometry hidden in the sound waves. It turns sound into a 3D map.
And we see the reverse with deafness compensation.
Yes, the auditory cortex gets repurposed, usually to enhance other senses. Deaf individuals often show enhanced peripheral vision. They're better at detecting motion, and they're more sensitive to vibration. The brain is maximizing the resources it has left.
And let's bring this back to medicine. How is this knowledge being used for healing from brain injury?
Neuroplasticity is the scientific basis for all modern rehabilitation after a stroke. Techniques like constraint-induced movement therapy, where you restrain the good limb to force the patient to use the weaker one, are all designed to drive that cortical reorganization.
But it's not always a straight path from the lab to the clinic. The research on progesterone for TBI is a good cautionary tale.
It's a critical one. In animal models, giving progesterone after a brain injury looked incredibly promising. It reduced swelling, cell death. It seemed to work.
But in humans,
The large-scale clinical trials found it provided no significant benefit compared to a placebo. It's a huge reminder that what works in a mouse doesn't always translate to the complexity of the human brain.
and sometimes plasticity can work against us. This is maladaptive plasticity, which we see in things like chronic pain and phantom limbs.
Phantom limb sensation affects a huge number of amputees, up to 80%. And the pain is very real. It's caused by the brain's map reorganizing. The area that used to represent the missing limb gets invaded by its neighbors, usually the map for the face or shoulder.
So when the face is touched, it activates the old hand area.
And the brain misinterprets that signal as pain coming from the limb that isn't there. That cortical reorganization is the pain.
And this isn't just for amputees.
No, we see it in chronic pain conditions too. The brain reorganizes in a detrimental way, sometimes even leading to a reduction in gray matter in areas like the prefrontal cortex. The good news is, with successful treatment, this is often reversible.
Let's end on one of the most exciting new frontiers, novel depression treatments. The old model was just about low serotonin.
Right, the monoamine hypothesis.
Yeah.
But it never fully explained why traditional antidepressants took weeks or months to work, even though they raised serotonin levels almost immediately.
So the focus shifted.
It shifted to plasticity. It turns out those drugs do work by improving neuroplasticity, but they do it very slowly. The new thinking is that depression is related to a loss of healthy synapses, a physical degradation of the brain's connections.
So the goal isn't just to tweak chemicals, it's to rebuild the infrastructure.
Exactly, which led to the discovery of psychoplastogens,
Huh.
things like ketamine. A single dose can have a rapid, potent antidepressant effect.
How fast are we talking?
Hours, compared to months for SSRIs. Ketamine works by rapidly stimulating the growth of new synaptic connections, especially in the prefrontal cortex. It's a complete paradigm shift from chemical balance to architectural restoration.
So after this whole deep dive, what's the biggest takeaway? For me, it's the complete death of the fixed brain idea. Your brain is never finished.
It's never finished.
Yeah.
And you have real agency over its future. Your choices, what you learn, how you move, what you focus on, are actively sculpting it every single day.
But we do have to acknowledge the role of age. The brain stays plastic, but the process gets harder over time.
It does. After about age 70, we see a reduced expression of the genes that are central to synaptic plasticity. The genes that maintain the scaffolding of your connections, they just don't get turned on as often.
And the brain is facing other threats, too.
Right. There's an increase in cortical DNA damage. It doesn't mean plasticity stops, not at all, but it does mean it slows down. The system becomes a little more fragile.
So what does this mean for you, the listener? If we know that using our brains, this activity-dependent plasticity, is essential for staying healthy, and we know the genetic tools for that decline with age.
Then the final thought we want to leave you with is this. Knowing that you have a biological clock ticking on how easily your brain can rewire itself, what steps should you prioritize today? Should it be intense learning, sustained exercise, intentional thought? The quality of what you do right now is the most powerful tool you have to shape your future mind.
A powerful challenge to end on. If your brain is built by what you do, then your choices are everything. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.